Security needs to remove that child right now. He's making the other passengers uncomfortable." The words shot through the air like a slap across the cabin, silencing first class in an instant. They hadn't come from a passenger. No. They came from a uniformed flight attendant, eyes locked on a 9-year-old black boy quietly working on his laptop in seat 1A. His name was Elijah Carter, and he wasn't disturbing anyone. He wasn't making noise, causing a scene, or drawing attention. He was simply sitting there, dressed in a neatly pressed navy vest and white shirt, his little fingers typing lines of code with a kind of calm most adults would envy. But in that moment, those cold, weaponized words sent a message louder than any alarm. Someone didn't believe he belonged. Before we go further, let me ask, where in the world are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if this kind of real, powerful storytelling matters to you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and help us share stories that bring truth to light. Now, let's go back to the beginning, just moments before those chilling words were spoken. Aboard Global Skies, Flight 528, en route from New York to London, a long-haul journey with a cabin full of high-powered executives, influencers, investors, and innovators, tucked into the front row of first class. Elijah Carter sat alone, to most. He looked like a kid pretending to be grown, but to those who knew better, Elijah wasn't pretending at all. He was a technological prodigy, the youngest developer ever to design an AI algorithm capable of predicting stock market behavior with over 90% accuracy. His code had just won him a major global innovation award in London, and this flight was taking him there to accept it in person. His father, Nathan Carter, was the billionaire founder of Carter Innovations, a global tech giant in AI and cybersecurity. But Elijah wasn't the type to flaunt that. He didn't carry an entourage. He didn't demand attention. He just wanted to do his work and get to the award ceremony on time. And for a while, everything was fine, until Margaret Hensley boarded. She was a white woman in her late 40s, sharp suit, expensive heels, and eyes that scanned first class like it belonged to her. A mid-level executive at Carter Innovations. Margaret had just received word that her latest AI project, a $50 million gamble, was about to be labeled a failure. She was under pressure, facing possible termination, and when she spotted Elijah in seat 1A, something inside her snapped. Her ego couldn't process the sight of a child, let alone a black child, occupying that space. So she approached him directly, ignoring his calm demeanor and the printed ticket in his hand. "This isn't your seat," she snapped. Elijah looked up with steady eyes, held up his boarding pass, and said softly, "It says 1A. Margaret didn't even glance at the ticket. "You need to move. You don't belong here." Her voice rose as other passengers began to glance over. "You're probably lost, or lying. Either way, I'm not flying next to you." At that point, Isabella Torres, the flight attendant assigned to first class, stepped in. She was Latina, professional, and usually composed, but the confrontation clearly rattled her. She checked Elijah's pass and confirmed it was correct. "Ma'am," she said cautiously, "he is in the correct seat. Let's please take our places so we can depart on time." But Margaret wasn't done. "Do you know who I am? I helped build Carter Innovations, and you're letting some kid sit in first class like he's a CEO?" Elijah sat quietly, watching, his eyes darting to his screen, then back to the woman looming over him. Other passengers began whispering, some amused, some annoyed, some silently complicit. A man 2 rows behind, Harold Langston, a well-known investor, nodded in agreement. "The boy should be in coach," he muttered. "This is first class, not daycare." And just across the aisle, a young influencer named Zoe Mitchell, with millions of social media followers, lifted her phone and began filming. "This is wild," she whispered, hitting the record button. "First-class drama, y'all." All the while, Agent Daniel Brooks, an undercover federal air marshal seated quietly in 4B, observed without saying a word. He adjusted a small camera hidden in his tie and made sure it was capturing everything. The cabin doors hadn't even closed, and already, the tension had turned first class into a courtroom. Margaret continued to argue with Isabella, raising her voice until a second flight attendant arrived to intervene. "Ma'am, I'm asking you to take your seat," he said firmly. "We cannot delay this flight." Margaret pointed at Elijah again. "That child is making people uncomfortable. If you don't remove him, I'll call security myself." And that's when Isabella said the line that shocked the entire cabin. "Security needs to remove that child right now. He's making the other passengers uncomfortable." She didn't shout it. She didn't scream. But the fact that those words came from someone in uniform made them hit harder than anything Margaret could have said. And in that instant, every eye in the cabin turned to Elijah. He sat frozen, hands still on his laptop, his face a mask of hurt and confusion. He wasn't causing trouble. He wasn't raising his voice. He was doing exactly what his ticket allowed. But that didn't matter. The mood shifted from disbelief to judgment, and a quiet wave of tension rolled through first class. Zoe's phone caught it all. Harold Langston leaned back smugly. Margaret crossed her arms like she had won something, and the young boy who had come to receive an award for his brilliance sat alone in a sea of silent accusations. Elijah closed his laptop slowly and looked out the window, the city lights of New York flickering below. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just waited, because something in him knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Margaret Hensley didn't sleep much the night before the flight. She hadn't eaten breakfast either. Her mind was spiraling with thoughts of failure, embarrassment, and the inevitable pink slip waiting for her once she landed. 47 years old and still stuck clawing for survival in a company she thought she helped build. The irony? The company was run by a man she once mentored, Nathan Carter. And now, she couldn't even get a call returned. Her last project, a high-risk AI model designed to predict market panic events, had just collapsed in testing. $50 million gone. And now, there was Elijah, his son, sitting there in first class like some child king, tapping away at code that was already outperforming hers. She didn't just see a boy in that seat. She saw a threat, a reminder of everything slipping through her fingers. Margaret returned from the flight attendant confrontation fuming. She stormed into the lavatory, slammed the door shut, and pulled out her purse. From the bottom, beneath her charger and gum wrappers, she retrieved a small silver USB stick, untraceable, encrypted, and loaded with falsified data. It had been part of a failed pitch from another project years back, useless to most people. But in this moment, it had one purpose: sabotage. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked at herself in the mirror. She wasn't thinking about what was right. She wasn't thinking about justice. She was thinking about survival. "Let's see if the boy genius can explain his way out of this," she muttered under her breath, planting a fake expression of worry on her face. When she emerged, the cabin lights had dimmed for takeoff prep, and most passengers were now seated and buckled. She approached Elijah again, this time with a fake smile and softened tone. "I apologize for earlier," she said quietly, reaching for her bag. "I think I dropped something when I passed by. Mind if I take a quick look?" Elijah blinked, confused but polite, and nodded. Margaret knelt, pretending to reach for something under his seat, then gently nudged his backpack aside with her foot. In a quick motion masked by her arm, she unzipped the front pocket, slipped the USB inside, and zipped it back before standing up with a sigh. "Never mind. I must have left it at the gate. She gave him a fake smile and walked away, heart pounding. Now it was just a matter of time. 10 minutes into the flight, the plane leveled out over the Atlantic, and the cabin crew began their service. Margaret stood up again, this time louder, calling to Isabella. "Excuse me, I need help. Something very important is missing from my bag. A device containing company data, highly sensitive." Isabella, already shaken from the earlier tension, approached cautiously. "What kind of device?" "A silver USB," Margaret said. "It was in my laptop sleeve. I saw it just before we boarded." She looked around, theatrically checking under her seat. "I think it was stolen. It was definitely here." Isabella's face tensed. "Are you saying someone on board took it?" Margaret's eyes narrowed, turning slowly toward Elijah. "I'm not pointing fingers, but someone had their hands near my things earlier." Elijah, who had been quietly reading on his tablet, looked up. "I haven't moved," he said. "I don't know anything about your device." "You were the only person standing near me when I sat down," Margaret said, now speaking loud enough for others to hear. "Look, I'm not accusing, but with everything going on in tech these days, we can't take chances." More passengers started turning in their seats. Watching, Isabella knelt by Elijah's seat, hesitating. "Elijah, would you mind if I check your backpack? Just to rule it out?" The boy paused, eyes darting between Isabella and Margaret. "I didn't take anything," he said calmly, but his voice had a slight quiver. "I understand," Isabella replied softly, "but it'll help clear your name." Elijah nodded reluctantly. Isabella opened the backpack and immediately froze. There it was, a silver USB, right on top, like someone had placed it there to be found. Margaret gasped theatrically. "That's it. That's my company data. Oh my God." Elijah's mouth opened, but no words came. His face went pale, and he sat frozen, unable to process what was happening. A few passengers gasped. Harold Langston shook his head. "I told you. First class isn't for everyone," Zoe Mitchell whispered into her phone, live stream still rolling. "They found a stolen device in the kid's bag. This is wild." Isabella looked from the USB to Elijah, her voice barely audible. "Is this yours?" Elijah shook his head slowly. "No, I've never seen that before." But it didn't matter. The damage was done. The whispers turned to murmurs. Murmurs became judgment. Judgment turned to outrage. "Call security when we land," someone shouted. "This is serious," another passenger added. "What kind of parents let a child travel alone with access to private data?" A flight supervisor entered first class, whispering urgently to Isabella. Then came the worst moment yet, when Margaret calmly stated, "We need to alert the airline's risk team, and I want authorities waiting when we land. This is corporate espionage." Elijah finally stood up, shaking. "I didn't do anything. That's not mine." But his voice was drowned out by suspicion, fear, and a cabin full of eyes that had already decided he was guilty. From the cockpit, Captain Amelia Wright was notified of the situation. She took a deep breath, listening carefully as the flight supervisor described a possible security breach involving a minor and sensitive data. With firm resolve, Amelia made the call. If the situation escalated, they would divert to the nearest international airport. They would not allow this to spiral further mid-air. Back in first class, Agent Daniel Brooks remained silent, still recording. But now, he activated the second camera in his collar. He'd seen enough. His training told him this wasn't a security threat. It was a setup. And as the crowd leaned in against a child, he knew the real storm hadn't even started yet. The wheels of Flight 528 touched down on Irish soil with a jarring thud that felt heavier than just metal meeting runway. It was 2 o'clock and 7 minutes in the morning local time when the Boeing 787 made its unscheduled emergency landing at Shannon Airport, inside the first-class cabin. The atmosphere was electric with unease. Passengers murmured and craned their necks toward the windows, watching the blue and red flashes of Irish police vehicles and airport security trucks pulling up to the aircraft. What had started as a luxury transatlantic journey had turned into something far uglier, something no one on board could walk away from unchanged. Elijah Carter sat rigid in his seat, his small frame stiff, his face pale but controlled. His laptop was now tucked under his arm, gripped like a shield. He said nothing, but his eyes flickered between the flight attendants and the crowd of strangers whispering about him. Some looked away in guilt. Others continued to stare, unmoved, across the aisle. Margaret Hensley dabbed the corners of her mouth with a napkin and smoothed her blazer, as if she were about to enter a boardroom instead of witness the public arrest of a child. "I'll need to file an official incident report with the airline," she said to Isabella Torres, who was visibly shaken, her hands trembling as she held the in-flight log. Isabella didn't answer. She just looked at Elijah and then quickly away, ashamed. The moment the main cabin door opened, 3 uniformed officers from the Irish Gardaí stepped inside, led by Inspector Liam O'Connor, a seasoned, fair-minded man in his early 50s, with a calm but authoritative air. Behind him stood a representative from airport security and an official from Ireland's Civil Aviation Authority. The inspector's first words were direct but measured. "We've received a report of potential data theft involving a minor. We're here to investigate and ensure all passengers remain safe." Margaret stood immediately, pointing at Elijah. "That's the boy. He's the one who had the device. It's company property. That data could cause financial damage. I want him detained and questioned." Elijah's voice broke through for the first time in nearly half an hour. "I didn't steal anything. I don't even know what's on that thing." "Son," Inspector O'Connor said gently, kneeling beside him, "we just need to ask you a few questions. Is that okay?" Elijah hesitated, then nodded, but as he reached for his backpack, his small fingers started to tremble. "I don't want to get in trouble," he whispered. "I just wanted to go to my award ceremony." The words hit Isabella like a punch to the stomach. "Nearby," Harold Langston muttered. "Award ceremony? Is that some kind of cover story?" Zoe Mitchell stopped live streaming for the first time, lowering her phone. Something in Elijah's voice made her uneasy. The Gardaí retrieved the silver USB stick and placed it into a protective evidence bag. "We'll run forensics," the inspector said, "but we need to bring the boy in for questioning." As the handcuffs came out, sized for juveniles but still far too large on Elijah's thin wrists, a collective gasp passed through the cabin. "Is this really necessary?" Isabella asked, her voice cracking. "He's 9. "We follow standard protocol," the airport official replied. "The presence of a foreign minor in an active investigation requires detainment until we sort this out." Elijah stood shakily as one of the officers guided him down the aisle. His eyes met Margaret's for a brief second. She offered him nothing. No remorse, no shame. Just a smug tilt of her chin, like a hunter who had bagged her prey. The cabin was silent except for the soft clicks of camera phones capturing the image of a young black child being led away in handcuffs at 2 in the morning for a crime he didn't commit. Back in row 4B, Agent Daniel Brooks remained seated, still filming, still watching. He had already uploaded the preliminary footage to his encrypted cloud storage. Time-stamped and watermarked. He tapped his earpiece. "Requesting legal liaison standby. Prepare for counter-report. We've got a situation unfolding," he whispered to his secure line. At the same time, Captain Amelia Wright exited the cockpit and stepped into the cabin. Her face was calm, but her eyes were sharp. "Is the boy being removed from the aircraft?" she asked. Yes, Captain. One of the officers replied. Standard procedure under suspicion of corporate data theft. Amelia looked at Isabella, who gave a small, defeated nod. Then Amelia turned toward the other passengers and raised her voice. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Due to this emergency situation, we will be remaining on the ground in Shannon for at least 1 hour while authorities complete their investigation. She paused. Let me be clear. No one will be reboarding until this matter is properly addressed. And until I have confirmation from Security and Flight Command, this aircraft will not move. Her tone was final, and it rattled the smug calm of those who had already judged Elijah. Meanwhile, Elijah was led down the jet bridge toward a waiting Garda car. He was not crying. He did not scream. But inside, something was breaking. Not just the fear of being taken somewhere strange, but the disbelief that so many adults, people who looked like leaders, professionals, had turned on him without a second thought. Isabella remained at the cabin door, watching him disappear into the dark. She felt sick to her stomach. She had doubted him. And now, watching that brave little boy vanish into the night like some criminal, she couldn't shake the guilt. I hope we're right, she whispered under her breath. But somewhere deep down, she already knew they weren't. And in the shadows of row 4B, Agent Brooks adjusted his tie, pulled out a small memory card, and slid it into his secure device. The truth was coming, and when it did, the fallout would be far greater than anyone imagined. As the Garda vehicle carrying Elijah disappeared down the terminal road, Agent Daniel Brooks stood up from seat 4B with the slow, deliberate composure of a man who'd seen this kind of injustice before. But never this young, never this public, never this twisted. The first-class cabin remained eerily quiet. Margaret had returned to her seat, sipping mineral water with the self-satisfaction of someone who believed they'd done the right thing. Isabella Torres was by the galley, biting her lip, gripping the armrest of an empty seat, her eyes wet with guilt. Passengers scrolled through their phones, checking the live stream, reading the comments, watching the views climb. Zoe Mitchell had stopped recording, but her viral clip had already taken flight. Across the internet, reactions ranged from outrage to confusion to open applause, because no one yet knew the full story. Only one person did, and he was about to change everything. Agent Brooks stepped into the aisle and addressed the nearest flight supervisor quietly, flashing a badge. Special Agent Daniel Brooks, U.S. Federal Air Marshal. I need to speak with your captain immediately and request secure access to the in-flight announcement system. The supervisor blinked in shock, then nodded. Less than a minute later, Captain Amelia Wright exited the cockpit again, this time flanked by 2 flight crew members and the inspector from Irish Security. What's going on? Amelia asked, her tone still calm but sharpened by tension. Agent Brooks held up a small black device the size of a phone. I've been recording from my seat since the initial disturbance. I have clear video evidence, audio and visual, that the USB stick was planted by passenger Margaret Hensley. I strongly recommend we bring the child back immediately and clear his name before this situation escalates further. Amelia looked stunned for a moment. You're sure? I never leave room for doubt, Captain. Brooks replied. And I have multiple angles, including audio of her speaking to herself in the lavatory, outlining her plan. At this point, Margaret stood up. This is absurd, she snapped, her voice tight. You're fabricating evidence to protect that boy. I demand you turn off whatever this stunt is and let the authorities handle it. But the inspector, now holding the USB stick in his own gloved hand, stepped forward. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to remain seated and silent until we review the footage. If what he's saying is true, you're facing criminal charges, fabrication of evidence, obstruction, and endangerment of a minor. Margaret froze, Her confidence wavered. Her hands curled into fists. He's lying. They're all lying. This is a setup. But the inspector wasn't listening. Captain Wright, do you have the equipment to play his footage for the cabin? Amelia nodded. We do. Let's do this properly. 10 minutes later. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, and the large screen at the front of first class flickered on. Brooks had already connected his device, queued up the relevant footage, and stood silently as the first few seconds played. There was no music, no editing, just raw footage. A high-resolution recording showing Margaret entering the lavatory, muttering. Let's see if the boy genius can explain his way out of this. Then the video cut to her exiting with the USB stick tucked into her hand. Next clip. She approaches Elijah's seat with fake politeness, kneels, accidentally bumps his bag, and, clear as day, slides the USB into the front pocket with one smooth motion. A visible flinch passed through the cabin. You could hear passengers audibly gasp. Someone dropped their glass, and then came the final blow. Audio of her back in her seat, whispering to herself. That should do it. Let them panic over stolen data. It'll buy me enough time. As the video ended. Silence hung over the room like fog. Even the hum of the engine seemed to fade beneath the weight of what everyone had just witnessed. Isabella stepped forward, her voice barely holding steady. I let them take him. I let a child be treated like a criminal because I didn't trust my own instincts. Zoe Mitchell, ghost white, covered her mouth. Oh my God. I posted everything. I called him a thief. Millions of people saw it already. Margaret, meanwhile, stood frozen, her face drained of all color, her mouth opening and closing but forming no words. She looked like a dam collapsing from within. The inspector didn't hesitate. Margaret Hensley, you are under arrest for fabrication of evidence, false accusation, and endangering the welfare of a child. Please place your hands behind your back. Wait, please. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I just... Save it for the judge, he said firmly, as he snapped the cuffs onto her wrists. For the first time that night, the balance of the cabin shifted. It was no longer Elijah under scrutiny. It was everyone else. The whispers turned inward. People began checking themselves, remembering what they had said, how they had reacted, who they had judged. Captain Wright stepped forward and addressed the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be grounded here in Shannon a bit longer as we correct the consequences of this injustice. Our passenger, Mr. Elijah Carter, is innocent, and he's returning to this aircraft immediately. She turned to the crew. Have the Garda contact local law enforcement and request the child's release, now. A few minutes later. The doors opened again, not with tension this time, but with hope. And in stepped Elijah Carter, escorted not by officers, but by a woman from the U.S. consulate, kneeling beside him with a gentle hand on his shoulder. His eyes scanned the cabin cautiously. He didn't know what had changed, only that something felt different. Then he saw the screen, paused on an image of Margaret caught red-handed. He looked up at Agent Brooks, who gave him a slow nod. You're good, kid. Really good. Elijah exhaled, his shoulders finally falling from their tight hold. As he returned to seat 1A, Isabella knelt beside him. I'm so sorry, Elijah, she whispered. I didn't protect you when I should have, but I will now. Elijah didn't say much. He just looked out the window again. Only this time. He wasn't wondering if people would ever believe him. Now. He knew they would. The low rumble of armored tires echoed down the rain-slicked tarmac as 3 matte black SUVs rolled up alongside the aircraft, headlights slicing through the misty darkness at Shannon Airport, inside the cabin. Every passenger turned toward the windows, whispering, squinting, trying to make out what was happening. The aircraft door had reopened again, but this time, it wasn't law enforcement stepping aboard. It was something else entirely. From the first vehicle emerged a tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark wool overcoat, flanked by two men in gray suits and a woman carrying a slim black briefcase. There was no question who he was, even before his name was spoken. The weight of his presence filled the cabin like a shifting tide. Elijah looked up, eyes wide with both hope and disbelief, as the man stepped through the cabin door with steady authority. "Where is my son?" the man asked, not loudly, but with such gravity that everyone nearby sat up straighter. Captain Amelia Wright was already there to meet him. "Mr. Carter," she said with a respectful nod. "He's safe. We've just returned him to his seat. The false accusation has been exposed. I've seen the footage myself." Nathan Carter gave a short nod, then turned his gaze toward seat 1A, where Elijah sat, small and exhausted, but safe. He crossed the cabin in long strides and crouched beside his son. "You okay, buddy?" Elijah's eyes welled for the first time all night, and he nodded slowly. "Yeah, now." Nathan reached out, touched his shoulder gently, and then rose to his feet. But when he turned to face the cabin, the warmth drained from his expression. What remained was focus, fire, and the protective force of a father who had just watched the world nearly destroy his child. He turned toward Margaret, still seated in the back of first class in handcuffs, guarded now by two Irish officers. "This woman works for my company, or at least, she did," Nathan said coldly. "Effective immediately. Margaret Hensley is terminated from her position at Carter Innovations. Her access to all systems has been revoked, and her company equity will be stripped pending legal action." Margaret tried to speak, but he cut her off without raising his voice. "Don't. You tried to destroy my son's future out of fear and pride. You weaponized your position to fabricate a crime, publicly humiliate a child, and nearly had him arrested in a foreign country. You don't get to explain that away. You're going to answer to the law, and to me." He turned toward the inspector. "We will press charges to the full extent: obstruction, false accusation, malicious conduct, defamation, whatever Ireland and U.S. international law will allow. I want her banned from flying on any airline affiliated with Star Connect, and I will ensure every corporate board in our network knows exactly what she did." Margaret's face crumbled. "Nathan, please. I was desperate. I didn't know what I was doing." Nathan didn't flinch. "That boy is 9 years old, and he handled himself with more integrity than you've ever shown in your entire career." He turned away from her. "Done." A ripple of discomfort passed through the cabin. Passengers who had silently sided with Margaret began to shift in their seats, their expressions pinched with guilt. Harold Langston, the veteran investor who had muttered earlier about Elijah being out of place, stood up slowly and cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, I misjudged your son. I let my assumptions cloud my judgment. I'd like to offer a public apology, and if your foundation allows it, I want to contribute $500,000 to fund scholarships for young tech minds, especially those who, like your son, aren't seen because of how they look." Nathan regarded him silently for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Thank you. A real apology means accepting the consequences of your silence. Funding education is a good place to start." Zoe Mitchell, still holding her phone with the screen dimmed, stood next. "I live-streamed what happened earlier. I didn't know the full story, but I still contributed to the problem. I've already deleted the video, but that's not enough. I'll post a public correction and make a video highlighting what Elijah actually created. People need to hear about his work, not this drama." Elijah glanced at her, surprised, and Zoe added softly, "I'm sorry. Elijah, I really am. Meanwhile, Captain Wright stepped forward. Mr. Carter, for what it's worth, your son handled this with a level of dignity that most adults don't even approach. The airline will be issuing a full apology and will cooperate with your legal team. I'll also be submitting a report recommending a review of our passenger profiling protocols. Appreciated, Nathan replied. He took a deep breath, then crouched next to Elijah once more. I know this was hard, but you stayed calm. You stayed true to yourself. I'm proud of you. Son. Elijah leaned in, whispering so only his dad could hear. I was scared, but I knew you'd come. Nathan's throat tightened, and he gently put his arm around his boy's shoulders. Always. A moment later, as Nathan stood again, the cabin began to stir, not with gossip, but with reverence. People had come expecting luxury. What they witnessed was accountability. Before returning to his seat across from Elijah, Nathan spoke one final time, his voice quiet but clear. Let this be a lesson to everyone watching. Never underestimate a child, especially when that child has truth on his side. As he sat, the rain outside the window began to ease. Inside, the storm had passed, but its mark was permanent. And for the first time that night, the passengers of Flight 528 began to understand they hadn't just witnessed a moment. They'd witnessed a shift. By the time Flight 528 was cleared to continue on to London, the story had already left the cabin and erupted across the world, somewhere between Ireland and England. As the jet quietly sailed through the dark sky, millions of people on the ground were waking up to a headline that spread like wildfire. 9-year-old black tech prodigy falsely accused on international flight. Air Marshal's footage clears his name. The first clip to go viral was the cabin footage from Agent Daniel Brooks, released by his department under emergency authorization due to overwhelming public interest and civil rights implications. It was raw, uncut, and irrefutable. In under 6 hours, the video hit 20 million views on TikTok, another 15 million on Instagram, and over 10 million shares on X, formerly Twitter. By the time Flight 528 touched down at Heathrow, it had crossed 50 million total views. Hashtags like Justice for Elijah, Fly While Black, and The Boy in 1A were trending in 27 countries. Within hours, major news outlets had picked up the story. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, and NPR all aired segments on the incident. The footage of Elijah's calm face as he sat silently while being handcuffed had become the defining image of the moment. The camera caught something deeply human in him, a mix of confusion, quiet pain, and extraordinary grace that made people stop what they were doing. For many, it wasn't just a story about one boy. It was a mirror held up to a world that still too often judged innocence by skin color. Meanwhile, Margaret Hensley, still in custody in Ireland, had become the face of corporate recklessness and racial bias. Her LinkedIn was flooded with furious comments before being deactivated. Carter Innovations issued an immediate press release confirming her termination and announcing an internal audit of all staff working in executive roles. Multiple employees came forward anonymously, revealing a long pattern of subtle bias and sabotage under her leadership. Legal analysts speculated that Margaret could face between 3 to 7 years in prison, depending on the outcome of the international cooperation between Irish and U.S. authorities. Several civil rights attorneys had already indicated they would be filing lawsuits on Elijah's behalf, against Margaret personally, and against the airline if deeper negligence was uncovered. But Elijah? He didn't ask for revenge. When he arrived in London later that morning, greeted at the airport by reporters and flashing cameras, he didn't hide, but he didn't pose either. He simply held his father's hand and walked forward, dressed not for battle, but for honor. That evening, at the Global Innovator Awards, the auditorium went silent as Elijah Carter's name was called. He stepped up onto the massive stage, tiny in stature but enormous in presence, and accepted his $1 million innovation prize for his groundbreaking AI algorithm that could detect market volatility patterns days in advance. When he reached the podium, he paused, looked at the crowd, and said something no one expected. "Before I say anything about technology," he began, "I want to say this. Code doesn't care what color you are. Machines don't judge you by your skin or your age. People do. But people can change." The room was dead quiet. Then, thunderous applause. He continued, "I hope the next time someone sees a kid like me in a place they didn't expect, they don't assume we're in the wrong seat. Maybe we're just early." The applause grew louder. Elijah smiled a little, then added, "I want to thank my dad for teaching me to keep going, even when it's unfair, and to everyone watching. Let's build systems that treat people the same way my algorithm treats data. Fairly." The crowd stood up, a full standing ovation, 7 minutes long. It wasn't just for the algorithm, it was for his grace, his clarity, his courage. That same evening, Captain Amelia Wright received an unexpected call from Global Sky's headquarters. She was being formally recognized for her leadership during the crisis. But what touched her more was the message from Elijah himself, delivered in person before he left the plane. "Thank you for believing in me, even if it came late." Amelia's voice cracked when she told her co-pilot, That boy reminded me why I started flying in the first place." Back in the U.S., Carter Innovations held a press conference announcing a company-wide diversity overhaul. Nathan Carter didn't just talk, he acted. A new division was created to review employee conduct, ethics, and racial bias with third-party oversight. But the biggest announcement came later that week, when Nathan introduced a new initiative, the Elijah Innovators Fund, a $150 million scholarship and mentorship program for underrepresented youth in STEM. The fund would provide full scholarships, laptops, and mentorship programs for Black and brown students starting as young as age 8. "My son shouldn't have had to endure what he did," Nathan said to the crowd of media and educators. "But if that experience can open doors for thousands of other kids like him, we'll turn that injustice into innovation." Meanwhile, the social media influencer, Zoe Mitchell, made a full public video apology. In it, she said, "I used to think recording everything made me an activist, but the truth is, without context, I was just another part of the problem. Elijah, if you're watching, I'm sorry I didn't ask before I judged. You deserve better." The video went viral on its own, gaining over 30 million views and earning praise for its humility. And though Elijah never responded publicly, those who knew him said he smiled when he saw it, quietly, and turned back to his computer. Because while the world was still buzzing with the story of what happened on Flight 528, Elijah Carter had already moved on to new code, new ideas, and a bigger vision. The world had seen the boy in seat 1A, but Elijah? He was already thinking about what seat he'd build next. Months passed, but the story of Elijah Carter never really faded. It lingered, echoing in classrooms, boardrooms, courtrooms, and even living rooms across the world. What happened on Flight 528 had been more than just an isolated incident. It had become a cultural landmark, not because it was rare, but because, for once, every part of it was recorded, revealed, and responded to with truth and action. Elijah's face, once framed in confusion and fear as he sat handcuffed on a plane, had since become the symbol of quiet resistance and brilliance under fire. But Elijah himself didn't dwell on the fame. After the award ceremony, he returned home to Palo Alto, where he resumed his schedule of coding, chess, and tutoring younger students through a program his dad helped fund. He was still a kid, still curious, still hungry to build something meaningful. And yet, He had changed. He understood now, with sobering clarity, that no matter how brilliant or innocent he was, some people would only ever see his skin. But that understanding didn't harden him. It humbled him, motivated him. It made him more dangerous in the best way possible, focused, resilient, and compassionate. The Elijah Innovators Fund, launched by Nathan Carter just 2 weeks after the incident, began taking applications from students across the country. By year's end, over 12,000 students had applied, and more than 300 had already been awarded full scholarships to attend summer STEM academies. The fund wasn't just about money, it was mentorship, community, and protection. Elijah made a personal video welcoming the first cohort, ending with, "You belong in every room you walk into. Don't wait for permission." His words were now printed on banners in robotics labs, public libraries, and startup incubators in cities from Detroit to Oakland. Meanwhile, Global Skies, the airline that operated Flight 528, implemented one of the most comprehensive overhauls in the aviation industry. In partnership with multiple civil rights organizations, they launched a new training protocol called the Carter Standard, a mandatory program for flight crews and corporate staff focused on racial bias awareness, child passenger advocacy, and truth-based conflict resolution within 6 months. Other major carriers began adopting it. Captain Amelia Wright, the pilot who helped de-escalate the chaos in mid-air, was invited to speak before a U.S. Senate Transportation panel about airline accountability. She ended her speech with a simple sentence: "Pilots don't just fly planes. We protect every soul on board." She was promoted later that year to Director of Crew Integrity and Flight Safety, the first woman of color to hold that title in the company's history. As for Margaret Hensley, her trial in Dublin lasted 5 days. The evidence presented by Agent Brooks was damning, the intent undeniable. The judge called her actions a gross abuse of privilege, power, and racial animus. She was sentenced to 4 years, with possibility of parole after 2. But the deeper sentence was public disgrace. Once a rising executive in a global tech firm, Margaret's name became a case study in bias-fueled sabotage. Her fall wasn't about revenge, it was about precedent. No one could pretend this kind of thing didn't happen anymore, and no one could say it didn't matter, back in Silicon Valley. Nathan Carter gave a rare televised interview on a Sunday morning news program. When asked what that flight taught him, he paused, looked into the camera, and said, "It reminded me that even with all my success, my son is still vulnerable in places he should be safe. But it also reminded me how strong he is, and how many people are ready to rise with him." That same day, a mother in Atlanta told her 10-year-old son, "If Elijah can keep his head up, so can you." A teacher in Chicago rewrote her semester syllabus to include a week on ethical AI and bias. A retired airline manager in Dallas mailed a letter to Global Skies, apologizing for never speaking up when he saw profiling in the past. Ripples, real ones. And yet, despite the noise, Elijah remained grounded in the quiet corner of his home office, surrounded by books and servers and small framed awards. He continued working on his algorithm, not for profit, but for good. His newest project? A pattern recognition tool that detects discriminatory language in online hiring practices. An AI watchdog for inclusion. He was 10 by then, and just getting started. The final twist in the story came on a spring afternoon in London nearly a year after the flight. Elijah and Nathan were invited to speak at a global tech summit at the Royal Institute, just before they went on stage. A young girl approached Elijah. She was about 8, wearing a bright yellow dress and holding a notebook full of scribbled code. "I want to build things too," she said shyly. Elijah smiled and nodded. "You already are." That night, as they stood on stage together, father and son, the crowd rose before they even spoke, not just for the boy who survived the storm at 3,000 feet, but for what came after. The reforms, the awakening, the hope. In his final words that evening, Elijah didn't talk about the injustice. He didn't mention the arrest or the video or the handcuffs. Instead, he said this: "Every time someone told me I didn't belong, it made me build something they couldn't ignore. So I'll keep building, and I hope you do too." As the applause swelled again, Nathan reached over, put his hand on his son's shoulder, and whispered, "You changed the sky." And Elijah, ever the quiet storm, whispered back, "No, Dad, we did. Thanks for watching. If this story meant something to you, give it a like, share it, and don't forget to subscribe. Take care, and we'll see you in the next one.